Hello. So welcome to SI Lab, episode number 10. And today we have two lovely guests. We have Lindsay Johnson and we have Christine. And Lindsay and Christine have NI in their function stack as opposed to Brian and I who have SI. So we're going to be comparing and contrasting the differences between SI and NI. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion. And what I like to do is to have the two guests introduce themselves, tell us a bit about your full OPS type and how you got into OPS and anything else you want to share.
Do you want me to go first?
You can.
Okay, sure.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Christine. My OPS official type is double feminine FiSe CPBS. And as far as how I discovered OPS first, it was through, I think, the usual pipeline. Most of us find it through MBTI. But I really appreciated all of the extra nuance and complexity that the system adds. And I think there's a lot of really interesting potential that the building blocks we have here offer for understanding a lot more beyond just the personality type discussions that show up in traditional MBTI spaces. So, I was curious to learn more and kind of get a sense of like how can I harness this too for personal growth. So here we are. I'm excited to share a little more of my experiences as the discussion goes on.
Cool. And yeah, I'm Lindsay. My OP type is FM, NiTe, blast, play, sleep, consume, last. And I kind of got into type after trying to understand more of where like I saw my own voids to be and like kind of define those and understand them better. And it kind of got me down this road of what is emotional intelligence. And meanwhile, I find out that I'm trying to really understand what Effie was doing. That was really like where I was trying to head. But I come across type in the meantime and had a great self-typing experience. Actually got myself I got myself as an INTJ, so self-typed correctly outside of the OP spectrum. And but then I felt really great about reading that definition, and I was like, wow, I feel like I'm understood. Like I feel like this is so much aligned with me. And then I found the MBTI community and I was wildly disappointed at what was going on there. And I almost was just out as quickly as I came in, but then I found some of Dave's videos. And I was like, well, whoever this is, like, they understand and they're looking at the same things as I am. And I felt like this synchronicity between like how our brains were looking at typology. And so then I kind of hopped on the OP train and have been there ever since. So.
Oh, well, great. And great that you found those videos and discovered OPS. And I'm thinking that maybe it kind of helps that, you and Dave are both INTJs, maybe that advantageous.
I think I smelled it. Yeah, I found the scent and I kept going. So
yeah, that's interesting. I like how you mentioned the emotional intelligence as part of your on-ramping too. And I haven't thought of it that way before, but that's an obvious connection. Cool. All right. Well, most excellent. So I'm going to start asking some questions from this point forward. And I'm going to have the two of them plus Laura mostly do the commenting tonight. That's okay. And so I've got just a few things lined up, and hopefully we'll kind of do a good compare and contrast and get some texture to what the distinctions are and what the common grounds are and where the blurry spots are. So with that, what I'd like to ask either one, you go first. Well, Christine went first, so we'll rotate to Lindsay going first for the first question, is the concept of OI. All right. So you mentioned you went through Myers-Briggs like many of us did, and then you found out this. And so how did you process that concept when you came across it? Did it land with you? And what was that all about?
So you're talking about when OI was introduced as the concept itself?
Yeah, when you learned about it, how did that land with you and how did you process that?
Well, if you look at the coin of OI versus OE, I felt like that resonated because when you're looking at the spectrum of humans, you can see when you start to like track the patterns, whether it's like, and you can't look at any specific instance either. You have to start like people who you know in your environment and the tendencies of people over time. If you're looking at humans that way, then you see a very clear, I feel like, defining line between OE and OI. Because you have, at the end of the day, the people who are the control freaks of the room, and then you have the ones who are like, okay, going with the flow and playing it by ear, you know? And when I started to kind of see like, okay, this is what we're tracking here on this coin, I mean, there was no doubt in my mind that that's how, you know, those two coins, how that coin was. And then you start to see it more and more as you start to pick up on like, okay, what is SI doing versus what is NI doing? Just, you know, that nature within people. So.
Okay. What about you, Christine?
Yeah, I guess building on that, one thing that I really appreciate with the OI OE distinction, as opposed to just working with like the traditional cognitive functions, is that you can look at behavior from a lot like bigger scale, so to speak, from like a much more general vantage point. And I think kind of like that's what you're describing too, Lindsay, right? That ability to see what trends are popping up beyond these like ultra granular, like, oh, there's only this one specific sensory thing that this person is talking about. You know, it's just you can look at a lot more layers of behavior having these more general terms.
How about you, Laura?
Well, I mean, I wasn't too surprised when I got my OPS type back, but I did have moments of time where I thought, well, you know, I could be Savior OE because you know, because of the NE part of it, I am seeing different possibilities. Well, it could be A, it could be B, it could be C. How can I narrow it down to just one? But then I found out, well, it's in a demon stage. It's stressing me out. And what I'm doing is, you know, I'm trying to get all the facts in order and all the facts lined up. So the Savior SI, you know, made sense that way.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious about that because for me, it took me a little while to kind of settle into those distinctions. They weren't as obvious. And I contend that I'm close to 50-50 on the two, and perhaps that's why. Plus, I had that confusion of thinking I was an NI user for many, many years. So I was kind of wrapped around some other axles. But I'm just kind of curious about you guys. And you, Christine, being, you know, SE over OI, or, you know, OE over OI, I was just kind of wondering if you had some kind of similar adaptation to it, but it sounds like it just smoothly made sense to you.
I think the other thing I would add too is that having these more general like OE, OI terminologies also helps it get a lot clearer to see the blend and even overlap that can show up between SI and NI. And I would say that for any of these like general function terms, you know, OE or even, you know, DE, DI. And so it gets a lot easier to assemble the kinds of spectra that OPS is always talking about when you can like kind of reconcile like, oh, SI and NI are not just these like stereotypical narratives, these like isolated boxes with no relationship to each other.
Yeah, well put. All right, cool. So this may be obvious, it may not, but you know, coming from Myers-Briggs, and I know many people in the community are familiar with many other different types of systems as well. But in terms of cognitive functions, do you think, and this may be obvious, but do you think other systems might emphasize OE versus OI the way the OPS does? Because to me, that's one of the big landmark parts about how they do things here versus the familiarities in other systems. Do you think other systems might end up adapting that as far as, you know, it is what it is?
I think I'll start with this one because well, I mean, like the traditional MBTI, like they do JP and, you know, like J types, like, you know, the stereotype is they have like their days precisely planned and organized, and they have like this routine and they got the schedule, and they're like, you know, good, you know, get stuff done. And then the P types, they're disorganized and they're procrastinators. And I mean, I guess OPS kind of maybe overlaps with it a little bit, but I think maybe more on like in terms of comfort with order versus chaos. But then some of this stuff I don't think lines up so neatly. Like I think like an MBTI wise, I don't think it's so super obvious necessarily that I'm OI, because I don't have every little second of my day scheduled. So I kind of stray from that. But where it fits in OPS is like, yes, there is a desire to, organize, the sensory world, and kind of have, kind of not have things so chaotic.
Okay. It was a little squirrely of a question, but I thought I'd ask it anyway because it crossed my mind when I wrote this down earlier today. Okay, so let's move on. And as we move through this, one of the reasons why we have this episode 10 planned where it's at, and it kind of fell out that way conveniently. At the beginning, we tried to draw in terms of sensory contrast between SE and SI, and we had Dave of all people on there, and I thought that was real illustrative and very helpful. So as we move to the back end of our series here, we thought we'd do the same thing with SI and NI. So that's why our lovely guests are joining us today to help us do that. So with that, for whoever wants to take this next question is where do you see in your mind the clear distinctions between the two? And again, some of this is obvious. And where do you see the blurry lines for you as an individual between NI and SI in terms of your life? And rotating, I lost track. I think Christine's next with this one, but I'm not sure.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that one of the fun and slightly aggravating things with the OPS system is that everything is defined just precisely enough that there is a ton of wiggle room to really interpret this to, whatever goals you decide to personally set. But honestly, I found that to be a really nice way to think about like a lot of different questions simultaneously with the same tools. I think like lately where I'm at as far as like conceptualizing the difference between SI and NI is thinking about like how the assessment process looks between the two. And the impression that I have at the moment is that it seems like BLAST really seems to be where the difference becomes the most clear. Just because like, if you're looking at how someone is explaining themselves, how they're talking, it's going to be mostly BLAST. And then the level of precision that they're defining things at that point is going to be much more obvious than like much more personal tasks, like information that's being taken in or things like that. And so it's like, if you're looking at somebody who's blasting very vaguely, then you can kind of get the sense of like, okay, now I'll watch for what kinds of detail has already been accounted for in consume, or like what detail they're going to account for in their consume. So it's kind of like the BLAST is not where hairs are being split. It's in the information that's being collected. And then, same thing the other way around for SI, the initial, the BLAST, the prototype, the idea being communicated is where detail is going to be much more present versus, the information that's being collected would have relatively less detail. And so thinking about how that would apply to my life, I mean, that definitely checks out with a lot of my experiences and has been a really good reminder to myself to think about like when I'm coming up with an initial BLAST prototype of something, am I laying enough foundations that this can then be developed through sleep processing or something else into something that has the level of detail it needs to be a final product in the future. I think Dave's analogy with thinking about like BLAST and sleep as kind of like product prototyping versus product finalizing development is really applicable here in thinking about NI and SI. But yeah.
Very cool.
Good. Yeah.
Laura, Elijah, either one of you guys?
Well, I mean, I was kind of thinking the same thing, the vagueness in terms of how the terms can be interpreted. And I think maybe that's something that both SE and SI share, because it we kind of want more specific sensory and some of the, because OPS, it is kind of, these concepts and, it's kind of more of an end thing and, trying to distill it to more sensory And yeah, I mean, I agree. It can be interpreted differently. People could, look at these coins and they could interpret it differently, which is why different people could type the same person and they could arrive at a different conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I think for myself, like where I see kind of like the similarities, differences in SI and NI, is, if I'm thinking, and it really comes to like where shared responsibility is held, when I'm in a group of other OIs, right? Let's just say for this instance, it's SI, right? I'm in a room full of SI peeps, right? There's a sense of shared responsibility that I can feel like within my body of like, we're all kind of taking the same road in terms of control, and we're on the same team as it relates there. Whereas like, but there's also this difference of, I see that we're on the same path of control over chaos, right? And we're playing on this team together, but you're taking responsibility for some stuff that I can't like wrap my hands around. And whatever that area is, I'm so grateful that you're the one that's doing it, because like I can't see the things that you're able to see. And my attention span can't touch the things that you're able to touch, right? In that period, right? It's like with, having consumed last and then Demon SE, it's like I feel like I'm always missing things, like constantly, like I'm always like 5 steps behind, and the ability to see something in reality, to respect it, and then to respect it in a way that creates order, which is like, I'm on the same team as order, right? There's something about that feels so synergistic with SI, yet I can still acknowledge how very different it is, because the exact specific area of responsibility it's taking is different. Whereas we're still walking down the same road compared to the OE side, which is taking a more free route, right? And I feel like a lot of times SI and I can look at the OE and we're like, wow, like look at them go, like they're so free, but there's kind of like this camaraderie of my SI friends, that it can be felt, but still respected in its differences. So
I have a follow-up on that. You mentioned, you feel like you're 4 or 5 steps behind sometimes because you're maybe not picking up the granularity or whatever it might be in the SI world. How does that come to you when it lands? Is it like consolidate and then an aha moment? What's the phasing of that when those details do land with you?
I think that, well, a lot of times, and this is probably just my own bias, a lot of the times those details really aren't relevant to anything that's going on. But if someone's like, oh, did you hear that song? And I'm like, no, what song? And they're like, did you see that guy? And I'm like, what guy? It's like, that's how I always feel. It's like that amount of steps behind. And whether that's really relevant or not to some, bigger picture, that's it. It could be or it could not be. Usually it's not, though, right? Usually it's just kind of like these passing moments that you're just kind of behind on or not taking in altogether. But sometimes it's in those little things that actually do contribute to something that is significant that you're trying to wrap your brain around. So it's always nice when they kind of lock in that way. But generally, it's just kind of missing things that are small in the day-to-day, which also would be nice to absorb at the same time as being a human present in life. And so that's kind of my own journey as well.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Christine?
I mean, that's interesting. So I kind of relate to what you said. Well, and I think for me, part of it is being consumed last, which we both share. But like I was with this group of people earlier today, and they were like, just talking about all these, the latest movies and music, and I just feel like sometimes I'm just out of touch. And it's like, if it's not in my box, it's kind of like I'm not aware of it unless somebody, brings it up. And so sometimes I feel kind of awkward because I'm just sitting there. Okay, I got nothing to contribute to this. And I think the other part, what you said too about maybe not kind of being like 5 steps behind because you're not taking in some sensory. Well, for me, I feel 5 steps behind, but for me, because I'm a sensory savior, I'm taking in, like these different facts and details, but then I got to assemble it together. And sometimes where I feel behind is more the big picture thing, like why are we doing this in the first place? Why do I need this? And so I get where I get stuck more is on the why.
Gotcha. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, the details of the delay plus the consume last, I guess they can gang up on you a bit too in terms of that.
Yeah.
Christine, anything to add on that?
I think an idea that we're all kind of focusing on here is like the role that the animal stack really plays on how much blend we're seeing between the intuition and the sensory, the abstract and the defined. So I guess one comment I wanted to make earlier was thinking about Lindsay's idea of shared responsibility, and I think that's a lot of what we're kind of talking about dealing with here is how do you reconcile the fact that you're never going to be able to define everything the way that you want, or that you're never going to be able to get away with leaving everything abstract and just kind of going off of just whatever impulse tells you to move forward when you don't have information. So it's pretty neat seeing how that plays out differently.
Right. Most excellent. Good answers to that. The next one, again, a lot of these are obvious, but ask them anyway. In terms of advantages, I think the community kind of recognizes that SI is one of the harder ones, and maybe hard to admit that you have, and even when you have it, you don't necessarily see it. So some of the advantages kind of speak for themselves in terms of the highlight of that topic in the community. But what about NI? What are some of the overlooked or advantages of having NI that might not be apparent to those of us who have SI in the community? How's that play in your normal day-to-day life in a way where you maybe don't encumbered with some stuff that maybe an SI person maybe does?
Well, I think NI, they just seem quicker and more confident because they don't need to get all that sensory. So, because gathering the sensory takes time. And, I remember at first when I learned OPS, I thought it was savior consume, because it's like, well, I got to take in some information. I can't just blast, without having the facts straight. So, but I think that, NI, because they can just kind of see a gist or a pattern, and that can be good enough for them. And it's kind of like Dave and Shannon when they type, and it's kind of like, they see a pattern. And it's like, I've seen this pattern in many, many people. They can go off of it and be confident of it. Whereas for me, it's like, well, yeah, they kind of remind me of such and such, but I can't respect that alone. I have to cross check. I have to gather more sensory, more facts.
Mm-hmm. So kind of going off that, a little curiosity is coming to mind here about, one of the things, for right or wrong, when I see NI and folks locking in pretty quick and being confident, as you say, I'm like, yeah, if you have a ton of SC contextual experience, that seems very valid to me. But where I see caution flags going up is whenever somebody, it's kind of like a TI user that's very good in one area. And then like Neil deGrasse Tyson, for instance, he jumps context, and don't want to defame him because he's a good guy and all, but he doesn't seem to recognize when he's out of his box, when he's out of his context of expertise. And he jumps around fluidly in all these different technical areas. And I'm like, man, not so fast, buddy. And I catch him time to time saying stuff that just doesn't make sense, but he does so very confidently. So dovetailing back to the temptation, I guess, to lock on to something with an NI perspective, where maybe you don't have the SE contextual reps in that domain. Talk a little bit about that. Is that something that I see that's a valid concern, or is that maybe just a bad perspective on my part?
I mean, I can definitely speak to that, because one thing I've been realizing now, like as I get older, life puts you through more sensory because you're living longer. And so you're kind of forced the SE upon you, no matter what type you are. And we live in a sensory world, right? And so what I've been realizing more and more is kind of like what you were saying, Brian, is that, you know, NI does have this bloodhound like ability to like lock into something and like bring a concept together. And a lot of concepts can overlay. And so sometimes it's only like one or two pieces that you're missing, right? And those one or two pieces usually relate to some kind of sensory or something that you've missed, right? And what I see now is that, you know, now as opposed to when I was younger, like I'm I'm much faster now than I was back then when it comes to bringing things together. And it is because I've had to just go through more sensory and I'm not wasting as much time trying to find it. And, you know, it's one of those things that you never see the other side until you're on there. It's like, if you asked me like 5 years ago, like, Lindsay, like, why are you wasting so much time like searching for sensory? I'd be like, what are you talking about? You know, like I'm solving the thing, you know, just let me do my thing. Right. And meanwhile, it's just like, you can't see how much time is being wasted. And I've always been like, time is the most valuable resource and this and that. And meanwhile, it's just like, I'm trying to like find some little sensory piece that like makes the whole thing come together, like voila, magic. And I never realized how much, just really how chaotic the whole process was, you know, looking back, it just seems a lot more, it's a lot easier now. And it feels a lot faster now. And it's one of those things that, you know, people, I feel like people in the MBTI community, especially, there's this fear associated with like working on your demon functions because they're like, what about my saviors? Those are supposed to save me. And like, you know, like I want to be good at the things I'm good at. It's like, you're already going to be good at that. And really only creating more space for your lower functions, it only makes your savior functions better. It only makes you like a stronger overall human. So there's no fear there. Like it only gets better. I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, time and reps. But what about the context before we move on to other folks? It's like, do you recognize when your NI is maybe locked onto something that's not valid? Because I don't have the reps, I don't have the SE, I don't have the context in that domain. Kind of like what I was saying with Neil deGrasse Tyson occasionally. Do you how would that realization come to you? How would you check yourself from not diving in and going hell-bent down the cliff towards something that might possibly not turn out to be valid because you don't have enough sensory detail specifics on that?
You know, I wonder if this is almost more of an NE versus NI thing. I feel like NI is so quick to filter out things that like aren't aligning towards the right direction. And so like I want to trim the fat. Like I want to get off the things like as soon, like I'm not trying to waste any more time going down a rabbit hole in some abstract place that like might end me up someplace that I don't want to be. You know, there's like a very I don't want to be there. And so it is kind of like it is kind of getting rid of stuff as fast as it can. And like, I'm very quick to like move and redirect if it's not kind of the right path or doesn't feel like the right way. And sometimes, you know, it might not end up being the right way, or maybe like the thing that you're going after really ended up being nothing that significant at all. Or, you know, you're like, okay, well, I solved that thing and I can't really do anything with it now. You know, like sometimes I get to that place and it's like, okay, well then you kind of just move on and like that box is closed. And so I think, you know, with Neil, like having NE, it's like, I think he's more open to the paths, whether they be really in any particular direction or not. Like it doesn't have to be to any kind of destination, where NI is always trying to get to the endpoint, get to the destination. So that's where the difference may be.
Yeah, got it. That's a good way to describe it. How about you, Christine? Any challenges or nuances in that area?
Yeah, I was going to comment on Neil being an NE savior and SI demon and still demonstrating the behavior that you mentioned. So my take on this is it's not necessarily like a function specific thing to see people like latch on to a particular idea and try to like apply it everywhere that they can. It's more of like, have you found an idea that like you are willing to fully invest in, that you think is right, that you believe is correct? I don't know, whatever. You know, it's kind of like, how much faith do you have in the cookie cutter that you're building or something? Because like if you are building a cookie cutter out of metal, you're gonna like, no matter what you slam it into, it's gonna keep its shape. You're gonna get the cookies that you think you will. But I mean, you know, coming from a demon NI perspective, I would actually kind of say the opposite, that like it's very difficult to get to a point where I'm like, oh, I know that all of this information I've accumulated means only this conclusion and nothing else. So it's like because the threshold, I guess, for reaching like a certain conclusion is really, really high, I don't really see myself like latching on to patterns all that often, but like if I do slash when I do, it's because there's like a truly overwhelming amount of information. But like, you know, somebody with like an OI savior or something like that would be like, you didn't need to spend that much time proving this, you know, without a certainty of a, or, you know, without any chance of a doubt coming into play here, to be able to recognize that this conclusion exists. So, yeah, that would be
That's
the
well
thoughts I would
said.
add there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. And perhaps I have a little bit too much of a concept on viewing him that needs to be reevaluated. I'm attributing to TI with stuff might be other functions or holistic functions adding together. So that's a good check in the system there.
I have another comment to throw in also,
Yeah.
which is that I think the more rigid you make your initial like OI knowledge structure, scaffolding, or cookie cutter, or whatever you want to call it, the more rigid you make that, the less receptive you can be to any other types of conclusions that you might need to draw to things in the future. And so I actually kind of think, generally speaking, that's a little bit of a disadvantage to only be looking for certain types of patterns to emerge in the world as you're moving through it. You know what I mean? Just because like what are you closing your eyes to in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to the whole reticular activating system and confirmation bias. And once you establish a lens on something, you're more likely to see more of it, you know, like the 1111 clocks and all that good stuff, right? Whatever it might be. So that's also a real good check to kind of sit back and to look at the holistic system and to not lock on to any interpretation.
So I guess my
Yeah,
question,
but then the irony,
because you're
oh,
the
sorry.
savior, sorry. Well, I guess because you're the savior OE in the group here, like, do you have any good advice for us savior OIs to not latch on things so fast, whether it be sensory or patterns?
I think it's not so much about like clearing out bias or like, you know, managing to have the perfectly objective perspective, because that's not really a thing. No matter what information you're collecting, you're always going to be gathering data that resembles some type of conclusion, whether that's an SI looking conclusion or an NI looking one. I think the question to ask for any of us, regardless of type, is like, what what types of information are you making yourself receptive to? What kinds of doors are you closing? And, you know, are those biases the ones that you want to intentionally choose or not? Because it's like, I think one thing that doesn't show up a lot in like discussions of like, I don't know, being objective and like not being biased in the ways that we navigate the world, um, is that we're all biased in some way. You don't get to like you don't get a get out of jail free card because you have like engaged in a particular form of like perspective development. You're just selecting a new one that you're maybe not defining as clearly. So
Yeah, it's a lifelong journey for sure. You never arrive there, objective perspective. So we're always trying to declutter those filters that might get in the way.
Yeah,
For sure.
and that's good too, Christine, like what you said about really it's basically like you're saying being conscious of what you're closing off versus just like closing it all off. You know, that's definitely I definitely default to like just like close it all off, like shut it all down, you know, like I'm the one who's selective in this process, you know, I'm the one who selects like, but it's like, you know, so being so quick to close those doors, there really isn't a sense of there is no consciousness going into closing all the doors. I can just slam them all shut, you know, it's very easy. Whereas the level of consciousness from an OE, you know, perspective would be to say like, am I closing the doors that I want to close, you know, or is there maybe out of these 5 doors, is there one that I want to keep open, you know, and that's like the level of consciousness from the OI side. So that was really good. I like that. Sticking it in my
yeah,
back
and
pocket.
maybe for like the OI perspective, it's like what doors do you choose to open and why? Same, I mean, the same thing applies there too.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I guess for me, maybe because you know, as an SI savior, I tend to think in terms of rules and stuff. I just naturally do. But my rule would be maybe keep one more door open than what you plan to have open. You know, keep that one extra door open just in case.
That's a good way to do it.
That could be the ticket.
Good practice. Yeah.
Yeah, just a little cue card in your mind to recall that perspective. Yep. We all need checks and balances to keep our minds from going the wrong direction and to optimize the chances of going the right. Okay.
Oh, can I throw in another comment?
Sure. Oop,
I think
geez.
also something that like OI saviors. Oh, did I freeze?
Yeah, you froze a couple times, but you seem to be doing good now. So go ahead.
Okay, great. What I was going to say is that I think OI saviors are particularly well, or like they have particularly strong ability to do something along the lines of like just bringing to clarity, like bringing to the surface, like what are the ways that you're storing information and organizing knowledge? Because that too is also a form of building your lens, right? And the more that you can like consciously be aware of what you're doing with your information, how you're organizing stuff, the more you can easily clarify what voids you're leaving too. So yeah.
That's good.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So the next question, I guess, would be, you know, we recognize life kind of requires SI, you know, academics does, you know, a lot of things in life require SI. So as an NI user, what's some kind of tools, tricks of the trade that you use to maybe allow you to do it a little bit better or to meet the needs of the world that require SI as an NI user?
You have to do your taxes. No, that's a joke. But it's also true. I think there's kind of like a breaking of like this set of resistance that someone without SI may have to say like, I'm not going to be the person that does that, to say I can be the person that does that some of the time. Because I think with like SI, you know, even like thinking back to myself when I was younger and like starting my first big kid job, like there was this moment I'll never forget where like I was handed all these like names and email addresses and someone was like, enter them in this system. And I just saw all these like, you know, names. It was like 20 sheets of paper. And I went up to my boss and I threw it on his desk. I was like, you're not paying me to do this. Like, if this is my job, like I'm done. And he was like, okay, that's fair. He's like, you don't have to do that. And I was like, oh gosh. But like, to me, it was like, there was such a, like an innate response of like, I can't do this. So like, therefore I would rather like go to a different job than like have to do this. You know, as you get older, it's like those experiences are going to come up and you are going to have to do them. And it's kind of like the ripping off of the Band-Aid of, I don't have to be doing this all of the time. Like I accept that, but I do have to do it some of the time. And like, that is what being an adult is, and just coming to terms with that. And then also realizing the fact that it makes your life easier long-term when you just give it the respect that it's due. It's not going to be your full life. It's going to be okay. And, you know, I think a lot of times from like an NI perspective, I'm seeing things so much wider that like having to like zone in on censor number one, but then censor like that clearly, it almost like I feel like I'm getting cross-eyed and like motion sickness, and like it seems very overwhelming to try to like get through to the end, but it's really not as bad as you know, I have at points felt like it was going to be once you've actually started going through it and doing it. So
very good. Yeah, and
So
I mean,
like,
if you put in more reps too, it is going to get easier. It's going to get.
yeah, there's a
Never be
general
your favorite
formula.
thing to do, but it will be more bearable.
yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say, Lindsay, is mindset and attitude matter a lot, and being willing to confront and being uncomfortable and realize the payoff that's coming are kind of some of the mindsets that allow you to engage it, right? So that's obviously really good advice. And there's a formula for learning to do anything. It applies. It doesn't matter whether it's piano or ballet or cognitive functions, you know, to some extent, I guess. Although neuroplasticity, there's arguments how much you can adapt and learn. But in any case, learning equals time spent plus quality of practice plus rigor and persistence. And to follow that formula, you have to have pretty much a good mindset and attitude and an understanding of the payoff. So that's kind of how I would summarize what you said. That's fair.
Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah, no, close enough. Yeah. What do you think, Christine? How do you deal with the SI?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, because I've already got DMO in the first place, so it's extra fun. No, I was very fortunate growing up to have people who were very good at that, who could kind of help me like hammer in the habits early on. And I think that just like opened a lot of doors in the long run, because like when you have those foundations in place, there's so much more that you can do, and you gain so much more flexibility to navigate all kinds of new contexts when you have those basic systems running. Like, okay, I have a good system for keeping track of my days. I can make sure that all my work's getting done on time, things like that. But I will say one thing that's helped me kind of like expand my SI a bit beyond what I was initially setting up, like in high school or things like that, has just been really, really leaning into just writing down everything. And sometimes I get comments where it's like, did you really have to write that random little detail down on a piece of paper or whatever? But like the answer is always yes, because in the long run, I'm going to forget about the details. And in the long run, I'm inevitably going to need something that like I can't just like store in my head and pull out at will. So it's always saved me. Um, when I get to the point of like, I have to keep track of like 10 different projects at once, and like be able to pick up a project after like 6 months of not working with it and be able to like jump right back into all the detail-oriented troubleshooting. If I didn't literally write down every single thing I was doing, that would not be possible. But yeah, that has just been like a huge lifesaver. And I think also just in general, like really leaning into the mindset of like how can I learn from other people who are really good at this, I've gotten a lot of really great strategies just from like, perusing the internet and like picking up things from other SI saviors.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's some structure and discipline and influences in your upbringing in regards to building those systems and note taking and all that, kind of proving the pudding of that formula, time plus practice plus rigor. And that really formed you into an orientation of kind of being able to do it with some pretty good success.
Yeah, and of course, I'm just talking about like the traditional viewpoint of SI. I think also like if you take it from like how SI fits into the overall system, it's just like, are you defining things? Are you defining whatever personal sensory you're collecting for yourself in enough detail? And so I think that is also something that can just be a regular practice of like, what do you mean when you say this? What do you mean when you say that? So that's been another really helpful rep too.
Okay, so getting some clarification details on the semantics and those types of things as well. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I got one more question, and then I'll probably shoot one from the hip. So like this series is mostly it's oriented around SI, it's SI Lab. So for SI users tuning in who may not understand NI well or may not even understand how to even utilize it, are there any tips coming from your perspective that you might orient them towards? To even know, because it's abstract, right? It's organizing abstracts, and they're detail SI, physical sensory oriented people, and they might not even identify when they're doing NI. So, in being familiar with the process and knowing what you know about OPS and cognitive functions, are there any tips that you might offer to such a person, like maybe me or Laura?
Okay, well, I think what I said before is like the thing I like about NI is its quickness, its confidence. But then on the flip side, I think sometimes NI can be too confident and they can jump to conclusions too quickly, and they can be too quick to lump things into the same category, and they're not seeing enough sensory nuances. Before we recorded this chat, we were making the observation that the color tops we're wearing are all kind of similar. but you can't just put them in the same NI category because yes, they're related, but they're not the same. You know, mine is more of a bright red. Brian's is kind of more of a dark, maybe a plum purple, you know, and Lindsay's is more burgundy. Lindsay's and Christine kind of look similar to me with the lighting, but there's still some slight differences. So I think SI can kind of appreciates that nuance sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Brick purple, huh? Somebody typed in brick purple. I see.
I'd say, like, you know, if it's something that you're wanting to like grow in or like use as a tool almost more, like if that's kind of the desire of it, I think you have to look at where the need to use NI might be in your real life to make it, you know, like applicable to you and your experience to make your life actually better by, you know, using it. And I think, you know, one area that I could see SI saviors wanting to like harness some of that NI energy just for their own life is really more when it comes to like states of fear where things seem too different and therefore they seem harder or scarier to navigate, or there's this element of something being so unfamiliar that it brings up an element of fear, I guess you could say. And then, you know, from the NI perspective, it's looking at everything as like Laura was saying, everything is so the same, you know, everything is something else. There is nothing new under the sun. Everything, you know, is something like else that was known, which happened in history a million times over again. And look, you know, we're still here. The world's still spinning, you know, Starbucks is still serving coffee down the street. And so everything is probably going to be okay. You know, I think that's a place where, you know, does NI lump things in very like overarching categories where it's not looking at the nuance? 100%. Can sometimes that be beneficial to like your own piece? I think yes as well. But it kind of depends like where, I guess, maybe you're needing to find that piece. Just like as an NI user, you know, sometimes I'm really needing to go find the differences in life to even appreciate it more. So and that would make my life richer, right? So how do you find the richest by applying the other is the way I'd look at it.
Yeah, very good.
And now
it's also
right.
good being in the community and seeing the whole spectrum and identifying and getting a little bit better over time at seeing what other people are doing and trying to emulate it. So I still give myself a low score in terms of identifying and doing typing and stuff like that. You know, like for instance, Lindsay, you said in one of your videos at one point about how when you heard Joe Dispenza talking, you were mind melting him. Well, you know, I felt the same way for all these years. Maybe I just had a confirmation bias. I love his content. There's nothing that he says that's not crystal clear to me. It's all very intuitive and sensible. So that's another reason why I thought I had NI at one point, because he clearly does, right? But then now I'm like, okay, how do I separate myself from that kind of vibing with somebody and then seeing what it actually is whenever I don't do that? Right. And it gets really confusing to me. So that's kind of one of the natures of my question there is really, as an NI user, how do the SI folks kind of like loosen the grip of the details and actually validly see NI in the wild?
And I think too, it's like kind of like Christy was actually mentioning, is like you can kind of fit any definition into any mold, and you can really like you can lash on to any particular sensory and make it fit what you want it to fit. You know, you can hear someone say something and be like, oh, that's exactly this thing, you know, and you can just like shove it into a box and like, you know, and want to believe it, you know, especially like to have your FI on board with like, yes, you know, like I like this fits in the place that like feels right, and just go with it. As opposed to like stepping back and like not taking any specific sensor to be the thing that defines someone, but is really it's really more like the direction. I mean, with typing, it's kind of like what I'm listening for is like the direction that someone's brain is coming to the things that they're saying, not really what they're saying, you know. It's what direction were they thinking from that brought them there. And with Joe Dispenza, it was like, for him, it's like I felt that cognitive direction so closely to my own that like it was almost like I wanted to cry. I was like, oh my gosh, like I've never like felt someone directionally think the way that I do, so just side by side. And it was more like, when I say like I wanted to cry, it was more because like I felt like I was hearing someone speaking my language so clearly that like I never get to experience that much like in real life, And so it's like meeting a member of your family. You're not really meeting, but it's kind of like you are, and and they're speaking a language that you've heard a million times before in your own head, but you don't get to hear it out in the real world very often, right? And so that's kind of where I felt that resonance with Joe. And so yeah, that's kind of a very abstract way of saying it, but yeah, I guess just kind of sticking to not latching onto the particulars, or not latching onto the fact that like you genuinely like content because or like something that's like happening or it feels good to like it and enjoy it, because like that's just FI at the end of the day. It's just like we all like to enjoy things, and certain things do feel really good to listen to, and like you can like a ton of different things, and like that's totally cool, but then that's kind of aligning with your own FI versus like someone else's, I guess, functions.
Yeah, and also, and that's very well put. Like for instance, there's no way I could understand this almost crying resonance that you had with him, and perceive how
So
maybe
corny.
it's an elevated plane comparatively to how I felt like a mind melt with him as well. But I don't know what your experiences was, so it might be a few steps down on the rung, so to speak. It's kind of like I made this of course an acronym, Delta Communication Channelization. When I talk to people in the Delta Quadra, it's almost like there's a switchboard operator up in the ether, the old school. And when we're talking, there's just plugging stuff in. And it's like it's flowing. It's just this real easy flow. And I guess that's the description you had when you experienced Joe Dispenza. It's like that final switchboard operator connecting to your brain. And you're like, oh my God, this is so powerful and so clear, right? So anyway, just a little bit on that. Christine, what are you thinking all this time?
Yeah, really interesting points. I totally agree with that. I'm gonna kind of take this the animal direction just to mix things up a little bit, I guess. So I was thinking about how we were talking about earlier the difference in blast between NI and SI, and I think that's kind of like a really good starting point for thinking about expanding into the NI world a little bit. Because like my understanding is that the experience with SI blast is like once you've made whatever your blast thing is, it's like very precisely defined down to the dimensions, the look, the feel, like how it exists in the sensory world. But the thing is like what happens when you change even just one of those sensory details. My understanding is like for the SI user, it's like, oh my God, this is a completely different thing. There's no possible way there could be meaningful overlap between the two. And so I think like one way to start branching out from that SI experience could be thinking about like what are the ways that I can modify these sensory details, but without necessarily changing the overall functionality of what I'm building with my SI. And as you start thinking more about like what is that overall functionality, like if I change the material of my water bottle from plastic to metal, does that still change the fact that it's holding water? And I think like the more you kind of think about what those common goals are that are still being accomplished, that's like a really nice bridge over into what NI looks like. Because what our experience is after a while of working on NI is like we're having to reconcile like 200 different types of water bottles that exist out there. And so once there's so much more variety that you have to think about and reconcile in some way with blast, there's really no other way to group them other than with abstract terms, just because those abstractions are the closest level of commonality that those 200 water bottles will have or whatever. So I think what I'm getting at with this first point is like it's okay to do some sort of form of blast that feels wrong, that feels really uncomfortable, because you could actually still be accomplishing the same abstract goal. It's just a matter of looking like, a level of abstraction higher to see what that continuous thing is that's happening despite the sensory changes. It may be less different than you think when you're changing the sensory details. And the other thought that I wanted to throw in too is that we were also kind of talking earlier about the theme that like SI tends to be where the responsibility for clarity and high resolution definitions for things is really well accounted for. So if that's happening in blast and sleep, I guess the challenge that I would raise for SI users is to say, hey, look at the level of rigor that you're doing this in blast and sleep and try to do it over in like the consume world, for example. Because like relatively speaking, you may still have like a lot of familiarity with details on the consume side, but is it at the level of your SI? And I feel like once you're really leaning into consume and trying to hold on to all of those details at the same level that like the SI level of detail might be maintained, it gets a lot harder to keep track of all of it. And so that's where you might start coming up with more abstract ways of keeping track of all the things that you're consuming. So, it's a very different type of grouping of information when you're having to keep track of so many more forms of detail variation, I guess. But of course, I'm just guessing, right? Fun times and I guessing here.
No, it's good
very
guessing, and it's just something to kickstart our mindsets to allow us to let go of some of the granularization obligation incrementally, and especially when blasting, maybe to practice saying things more vaguely as just a kickstart to maybe not being so trammeled to that need to do it, right? And then through that might be an art and a practice that gives a better contextual understanding of NI and how to blast it than maybe it's being done now. And of course, you can't see ourselves. So, again, I always thought I did that, what you're saying, but obviously I don't from so many people's comments. So letting go of that obligation to all the details and the specifics is something that I think would be very helpful if I could do it. Hopefully I will be able to.
And then kind of to add to that's a very good point. It's like, because you could change one variable, but it's still the same fundamental thing. And I guess that's something I've had to learn over time because I've kind of erred on the side, well, if I change a variable, I might be changing the thing and the product will be different and most likely it's still going to be kind of the same product. And now I'm getting kind of more comfortable with being able to change more of those little things, as long as the end thing is still kind of the same basic thing. So it's a muscle that I'm trying to work.
Yeah.
And there's that word again, comfort, right? And that's what it is, these obligations are comfortable. And if we want to let go of some of those obligations to try to emulate some other or simulate some other function, you got to get uncomfortable in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you're just going to continue to stay on the same track you've been doing things.
Yeah. And like that was so good, Laura, when you were like, feeling as though like a variable will change the outcome. Like, yeah, that's a beautiful contrast, because it's like, with NI is like, to us, it's like everything's the same, it's just a different package. It's like, why are they able to sell a million different kinds of soap when you go to the store? It's literally all soap. It literally cleans. Like, that's what it does. It's soap. But how are they able to sell a million different varieties with every scent and everything? The scent doesn't change the fact that it's cleaning. It's still soap. And so it's like, how has marketing done that? It's like, oh, well, we're going to change the package. The package is going to look like this. So this one's going to smell like this. So it's different, It's like, it's still just soap. It's still all the same. And so, when you're feeling like the variable will change, just be like, is it still soap at the end of the day?
Yep. That's a good way to look at it.
It's still lost in the soap aisle.
In branding and marketing and all the ways that we're kind of manipulated at the marketplace, there's one thing, and there's certain levels of severity, but on things that have a lot more weightiness to them, then the comfort level is going to have to really get loosened up to change the pattern. Because I could see the point, and I think I can imagine myself doing that. But nonetheless, when the severity goes up, then the cleaning and the comfort to the details becomes more of an obligation, to use the OPS terminology.
Yeah, and there was a girl actually. She was talking in the OP Discord one day, and now I don't remember what her name is, and I feel bad. She was SI Savior, and she was talking about a challenge she was experiencing at work where her team was kind of getting frustrated with her because her way of organizing the information for them was very once we got through the first step, then we talk about the next, and then we talk about the next, right? And there was an order in which she was explaining, you know, to this group, and they were kind of like, okay, like they were like losing their attention. They were kind of like, get to the point, like this is taking, like, what's going on? Like, why are we even talking about this? And, you know, she genuinely felt this sense of like angst over the fact that like she felt like she was losing her parts of her team, or like her team camaraderie, over the fact that she wasn't, essentially, like Christine was saying, like blasting like the way that they were wanting to receive the blast, you know. And I really felt for her because I could feel her responsibility to wanting to address one thing before she moved on to the next, because for her it's like everything had a sequence, and the sequence had to be respected, you know. And like after kind of processing what she had said, like, you know, after that chat had ended, I was like, gosh, you know, she really could address the sequence as though as she wanted to. All she had to do is like take the end and just put it first, you know, and then she could kind of go through her sequence as it felt right. But a lot of times people are just looking to be like, to understand like why is this being discussed, and then it's like, then the details make sense because you already know what it's leading into, you know. So that's my last NI tip to throw in there.
Oh, that's really good. It reminds me of
kind of learned to do. I used to be a teacher, and I used to teach introductory chemistry at a community college, and that was something I ran into. You know, it's like I had this sequence that I wanted to do things in, and I didn't want people to disrupt me from that and ask me some weird off the wall question that we hadn't got to yet, and they felt like they had to know it, and they're probably a savior and, you know, like the bigger picture thing. Like,
yeah, it's like navigating forward, saying where you're going, and then filling the details as necessary, kind of like an executive wants. You know, I deal with a lot of folks like that. In fact, I used to be accused of that myself. It's another reason why I thought I had a certain personality type. It's like, tell me the bottom line, tell me the answer, and then I'll ask you the details if I need to. But then I find myself in other situations in normal life, so to speak, where I'm just going through unnecessary stuff and losing people in the process. So I'm trying to find that balance point for myself, and I'm sure other SI users are struggling in similar ways. So just trying to get some antidotes that might loosen things up for them. And I think, you know, the comfort level and the obligation are kind of what I'm mostly hearing. Is if you can loosen that a little bit, then you might be able to approximate NI better and cut to the chase quicker.
Yeah, well, I mean, I work at the library, and we have a Silhouette Cameo paper cutter machine, and I do library programs showing the basics of how to use it, and we print like stuff out, and I do like a demo. And then, and the kind of the way I've been approaching it now is like, what are the key things I want these people to take home? And then rather than worrying so much about, I got to do it this ordered, you know, it's okay to mix it up. You know, if somebody disrupts you with some question on something, it's okay to jump ahead, as long as you kind of get the main things covered. And sometimes I've also got to assume too that they can maybe fill in the gaps themselves, you know. Maybe I assume that they're any deficient or something, and they're not going to fill in those gaps unless
you have concern for them.
Again, I'm hearing comfort, and, you know, trust is part of comfort, right? So you're trusting that they can fill in the gaps themselves, versus I think we have a propensity as SI folks to think that, oh, they need me to fill in these gaps for them, whenever they don't necessarily feel that way.
Yeah.
Plus, people can always ask whatever they want to clarify.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
There's the IP in the room.
I was teaching, I mean, she's just like me, but maybe a more extreme fixed mindset example. And I mean, I'll admit she's exhausting, because she's like what I was maybe 5-10 years ago, you know, kind of like, I can't trust myself to figure this out myself, you know.
That's an interesting perspective to see that journey. where you were and be able to calibrate and recognize your progress and where someone else is growing into and maybe mentor them. That's pretty cool perspective.
And also like allowing them to like go through that own journey of like realizing it and getting there themselves, you know. I also saw for myself, like so many years I had people would be talking about things and my instinctual reaction was like, don't you guys see what's this going to happen if this, like, don't you see where this is going? Like, don't you see how these pieces come together? And then it's like, and I'm seeing them not see it. And then I had this responsibility to, of course, being like, you know, TE as well, to help and, you know, be like, wait, we can save this, you know? And then like, I felt like a lot of my personal evolution was to say like, yep, I see where this is going. I understand that they don't see that right now, but this is their journey for them to learn and for them to experience life and go through their own experience. And I don't need to, first of all, drain my energy, you know, trying to, you know, put out a fire that wasn't mine to begin with. And, you know, just having peace with the fact that, you know, that's how people learn and grow.
I think that's another reason why I think, and you know, anybody can type, but you're kind of like letting go of the reins and seeing where it's going and then putting data around it versus the other way around. So like my thesis is that this whole system's built around Shan's brain, and that feminine SE opens up the bandwidth, that visual opens up everything, and then the NI, it knows where it's going, and she locks in really fast. And I think that process plays out for her that way. Do you guys see it that way, or do you offer some other perspective on that? I know I went off a little bit on a little tangent
with typing specifically.
Yeah, with typing, with the okay, I pivoted without introducing it. So NI and SI in terms of seeing it in other people and the typing skill sets and letting go of the details in the process of getting into the right NI box a little faster. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, I think everyone has their own challenges when it comes to typing, no matter like what type you are, NI or SE or SI, or, you know, no matter what your observer is. And I think that our own cognition and our own bias like is our own like psychology that we have to overcome in order to get better at typing. Because like at the end of the day, like I'm always going to be missing the sensor, which sometimes can be good and sometimes can be bad. And I'm always going to be struggling with consume last, you know? And so it's like my battle might not be the same battle that someone else is fighting. But it's still my battle, you know, and it's still hard in my own ways, you know, and like consuming the amount of adequate information that I know I need to consume to like type someone correctly is that's still difficult, you know? And so I think, you know, while like, and I can, if we're doing the right things, sure, that can be an advantage because you are looking at things more globally and more like scoped out, and looking at the patterns more over as a whole. But you have to be consuming the whole in the first place. So it's like, you know, that's kind of like the double-edged sword, at least for, you know, through my animal stack and functions.
How about you, Christine? Any comment on that?
I mean, I don't really lean into the typing side of things much, so I don't know that I can comment on that directly, but I think generally like the whole experience, like learning about these functions has been really eye-opening in terms of thinking about like where am I dropping the responsibility for clarifying like what information I'm exploring, or where can I take a step back to create more space to define other things that I've been slacking on or something like that.
Okay, nice. Okay, so before Laura takes us home, does anybody else have any other comments or stuff? Again, like put your SI viewer hat on, who's trying to understand SI better as an NI person. Is there any other advice, counsel, insights, perspectives, anything of that nature?
I feel like I've blasted a fair bit.
What's that?
I said I feel like I've blasted a fair bit. If I've
you
left
have.
anything out, I'm sure it'll pop up to me in the middle of, you know, doing
Right.
something else completely unrelated.
Fair,
I'll
fair.
hop off the Zoom and then I'll go, oh,
Yeah, that always happens.
And that's what the comments are for. You know, people can always write things in the comments, or we can even add comments to the video. Oh, here's some other thing thought of that people might want to know. So
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Laura, take us home.
I think it was pretty comprehensive. I think we got a lot of key tips, insights from both sides of the SI NI divide, or maybe I shouldn't even say divide, because
Mm-hmm.
you know it's all a lie. It's all a
It's
lie.
all a lie.
Put it together
Exactly.
and oh hi. Exercise the NI there. Okay. Yeah. So I want to thank you very much, Lindsay and Christine, for being guests and offering insight into the NI function. I know I learned quite a bit about how to work that NI muscle better. And yeah, it was kind of great seeing the similarities and differences between the SI and the NI, because I mean, they're related because they're both forms of OI function. They're operating under the same basic human need of organize, but the way in which they're doing it is different. So it was an interesting discussion. And Lindsay's got a YouTube channel that's very successful, over 30,000 subscribers. I will link to her channel in the description. So check her channel out. She talks typology in some of her videos. She does talk about OPS stuff. Christine, do you have any YouTube channel or social media you want to promote? That's
nope,
fine.
I am offline.
Okay. Well, thanks once again. And
Well, one other thing, Laura, I made a call, or we're gonna have one more episode on SI content, and then we'll do a wrap-up episode. And so episode 11 made a call, and our thought there is to complete it, to do SI in all 4 locations with the social hierarchy. Now, assumedly, Laura's a 3, although she claims to be a pi, 3.14. And assumedly, I'm a 2. Most people agree with that. Some people think I'm a 1.
I can see that.
I'm not sure about the 1, but anyway, so we're looking for a 1 and a 4 to appear on an episode, so we can have all 4 positions in episode 11. So if you watch this and that's you, please get in touch with Laura or myself.
Okay, and preferably with Savior SI this time, so we can kind of compare
Yes,
SI
right.
and
SI plus SH 1, 2,
social
3, 4.
types. All right.
Cool. Well,
And by the way,
us on.
since Laura didn't speak for herself, go to like and subscribe to her channel too, please. She's very gracious in letting us use her channel for this series. So
Yeah.
throw her some
And
love.
ring
Throw her
that
some
dreaded
light.
bell for notifications.
All that stuff.
Ring the bell.
A cheesy blast. Ring the bell.
There's some blaster for you. Subscribe, okay.
In case you don't know what the bell looks like, here's the bell.
I see him doing that. Hey, all right, we got an appearance from.
Hey. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.